Hey, I'm Annie Ruth, and I had the opportunity where I got to watch the video that was provided to observe the preschool class. And I just thought that there's so many great takeaways that I was able to take away from that, as there was a lot of practical examples that were put into place. Because sometimes it's a lot easier to just kind of like hear what you can do in the classroom, but it really helped like futuristic wise of me wanting to go into education and me wanting to go into teaching. It really showed like what things like actually can happen in a class, and it was just a great visual to really put into my head of like what realistically what that's going to look like. And throughout the entire video, there were just so many things I was able to see that I was like, oh, that's such a great idea, or I've heard it before, or even like when I was a kid, the same things. Like, for example, one of the things that she did was there was like an alphabet song that she was singing, and it was so fun, like being able to kind of go along with that. And I'll talk more about that later. But there were four kind of main themes that I kind of took away when I was watching the video. The first being classroom engagement. And then the second one, so for those that didn't watch the video, this is kind of like helps with it, but for those that didn't watch the video, there is a child, so they're all like sitting in a circle, but there's a child that has like a physical disability, so there's a lot of things that like he couldn't necessarily do. But one of the other main themes that like the second theme that I really took away was addressing including the child with the disability. Throughout the entire time, the teacher is really trying to engage with him and have him included in everything, along with there being a teacher aide right there with him as well. The third is body movements and hand motions. Throughout the entire video, she's either doing something with like snapping, clapping, having them move around, just like really got them like moving, which also really helps it with their brain. We talked about this in class before. So that's something that really stood out to me. And then the fourth being fairness and inclusivity. Those are just kind of the four that like I really took away from watching, and those are kind of the main like four things that I also was able to connect back with the class we've talked about before throughout the entire semester. So the first thing we're going to touch on is classroom engagement. And one of the very first things I noticed in the video is how the teacher had them all sitting in a circle on the carpet. And I think that's just something to really point out because she really wanted them to all kind of be in the same area. And they really easily could have been at different tables or different chairs or whatever she really would have wanted them to put in. But instead she wanted them all together, sitting together, and being able to engage with each other, which I thought was just super unique. At the very beginning of the video, they were all like counting out loud to a certain number, and she had them all turn to their neighbors and high-five them, which also just shows like they're able to interact with one another like in a closer setting, but also shows the friendships they're able to build and the encouragement that they can also have towards each other. The whole time she's very interactive with them, which I think is also something to point out because she really easily could have just gone to like one student or had it be directed towards just one, but instead she had all of them included in every single activity. But one thing I also do want to point out is that also throughout the video, she would sometimes, like an example is when they were trying to figure out what the weather was for the day, what she would do is she would have like a little jar that had all of their names, and she'd pull out the name, and then she would show it to the class, and they would try to like read the name of whose name it is, and then that person would go up, and then they would interact with her one-on-one, but also like help like teach the class in a way. So with the weather, she was trying to they were trying to, as a class, they were discussing about what the weather was like outside, whether it was sunny, cloudy, and so they were kind of all going back and forth whether they thought it was sunny or cloudy. And so then she had one of the students come up and had to pick out the picture of what they think it's like outside, and then they would put it up on the board so that the whole class can see. So it really shows of how she was wanting to engage with all the students, but also have some of them kind of be one-on-one to help teach the other students as well. And where I connected this to the class is with collaborative play. That's something that when I was reading through the book, that's something that really stood out to me, is how like engagement with others also plays a part in that. And that's something that's like a life skill for them, not necessarily like in the classroom, but also just at all times. So the next theme to address and talk about is how the teacher was addressing and including the child with the disability throughout like the entire time. Where I like really saw this was towards the beginning of the video, they were doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and she went over to him and asked if he, because he he has to sit like in a certain chair, and she was like asking if he wanted to stand up with the rest of the class, but she like gave him the freedom of whether he wanted to do that or not. Or even throughout the time, like the kids were all super encouraging of him, but whenever they would do anything where it involved like having to stand or really having to like move around, she would always ask him if he wanted to participate or not, which really she really easily could have just been like, no, like he doesn't have to, or like make the decision for him, but she really was wanting to include him in everything else the class was doing. But one thing that really stood out to me was how each child didn't see him any differently. They all saw him just as equal as the rest of them. And that's what we talked about in the book when I was kind of reading through what children with disabilities, like how that kind of plays a part into like the preschool and just early childhood development. It says when like it was on page 13, it was talking about how kids have a more positive outlook on those with other children with disabilities because at that age they see everything as each person is equal, which then really struck out to me as they didn't see him any differently, they didn't treat him any differently, they thought he was all the exact same. They would encourage him, want to have him be included in everything, which is something that I really kind of took away from the video. The third theme is the body movements and hand motions, and like I said earlier, throughout the entire video there's always something that involved them having to do something with their hands or movements, standing up, really whatever it might have been. But an example was during the alphabet song, what they would have to do is like an orphan, and it was one of those things where as I was watching it, you could tell that they had already learned this before, but their memory was able to really come out because first off, it was a song, and second, because it was having to use hand motions. So it'd either be stopping like their knees like this, or they move their hands, or like do hand motions like this, which I know for me, like as a child, that really helped me when it came to having to learn things. Even still now, like whenever I have something that involves me having to like have a certain thing to remember, that was really helpful for all of them. That was like one of the main things that really stood out to me. Or even at the end, they were learning how to do like yoga poses, for them to kind of be in a different like setting rather than having to sit still the entire time, because I know like younger kids, it's kind of hard to keep them entertained for so long. And so she did a great job of being able to break it up, of like rather than having to sit down and like learn, she was really wanting to have them be like move around and engage with another in that type of way. And then the last theme to kind of talk about is fairness and inclusivity. The main example that I saw of this was at the very beginning, when they were going around and they were giving high fives to one another. One of the she turned to her, the teacher turned, because they're all standing in circles, she turned to her two students that were next to her and gave them high fives. Well, there was another student that was like, oh, well, can I have high five? She was like, well, I'm not your neighbor, so I can't. But she said it in such a polite like manner that I really took away. I was like, oh, that's such a great way to be able to communicate with a child that's so young, but also showing of how if she were to give a high five to that one student, then she would need to give one to all of them, which isn't fair to everyone. And that would just create something that's not what the instructions were, and that's not what she was wanting to do. And so I thought that was something that just like really kind of took away from that. But also one thing that I found in the book is how it talks about how fairness is like developed quite early in children. So, and it was when they didn't like fight back. Like after she was like, oh, sorry, no, I cannot give you one, only to my neighbor, they didn't ask again. They didn't try to beg, plead, nothing like that. They were just like, okay, and sat back down. So I thought that was like one big takeaway that I saw of just a great example of how she was trying to be fair with all the students rather than showing like favoritism or like exceptions to just one. Overall, I thought this was just a great example of what it looks like to be a true educator and how I'm able to implement these just these things into the classroom later on.